All right, today we are talking about midpoints, section 1-3 for us. When we hear that word midpoint, obviously when we hear that word mid, right, we think of the word middle. Okay, so we are talking about middle points. Now that has a couple different meanings. When we talk about midpoints, okay, today we're going to focus on midpoints that are directly in the middle, where we have two equal pieces. Like here we would have AB is equal to BC. But a midpoint doesn't necessarily have to be directly in the middle. We could have midpoints that are a third of the distance or 3/4 of the distance, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later on. So if you're on the notes with me, then we are going to start with midpoint formula on a number line. Okay, so the first thing that we are doing is we are going to put point A at -5, and we're going to put point B at +3. When we find the midpoint, we are finding a location, okay, right now that is halfway in between point A and point B. So if we look here, there's two different ways to think about this, okay? The first way is with distance. From -5 to 3 would be 8 units. Half of 8 is 4. Okay, so from here to here, right, we have 8 units. Half of that is 4. So then 4 units would put us at -1. Okay, that's one way. The way that we're going to focus on is actually the midpoint formula. And the midpoint formula for a number line we're going to write as A plus B divided by 2. The more generic way is going to be 0.1 plus 0.2 divided by 2 equals the midpoint. Now when we use midpoint, we're going to use the letter M. So to solve this, we would say M equals -5 plus 3 divided by 2. Okay, -5 plus 3 is -2 divided by 2, which ends up giving us -1. So the midpoint of AB would be -1. That's a specific location on the graph. Okay, so if it's on a number line, you take the two numbers, add them together, divide by 2. On the bottom half of that, we have midpoint on a coordinate plane. Now when we have midpoint on a coordinate plane, we have x values and we have y values, which means our midpoint formula has to have two pieces. Okay, our first part, we have to have x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then our second part, we have to address the y's. So we're going to have y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Now the next thing we need to do is look at the points that they gave us. So find the midpoint of -8, 3, and 4, -7, and we're going to label our x's and our y's. We're going to have x1, x2, and we're going to have y1 and y2. Okay, remember that x1 and y1 have to go in the same coordinate, and then x2 and y2 also have to go in the same coordinate. So if we want to find the x's, okay, then we are saying x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So we've got -8 plus 4 divided by 2. So -8 plus 4 is -4. Divided by 2 still, and we end up with -2 for that x value. And then we're going to do the same thing with our y values. Okay, and we've got 3 plus -7, y1 plus y2, divided by 2. 3 plus -7 is -4, divided by 2. And we just so happen to get -2 for this one as well. Now, that's not always going to be the case, but today it is on this problem. Okay, now, because that's the midpoint, up at the top we had x1, y1, x2, y2. For us, we're going to call this xm, because that's the x of the midpoint, and ym, the y of the midpoint. Now, if we had this on a graph, we can do a couple of different things. So our points are at -8, 3. We're going to call that point C for a minute. And 4, -7. I'm going to call that point D. So if we connect those points together, then we can see that the middle of that line is probably going to intersect in quadrant 3 right here. Okay, remember we have quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Okay, so we could also look at this with rise over run or Pythagorean theorem. If we were to draw horizontal lines, let me fix that real quick, horizontal lines and vertical lines, we could see that the horizontal distance is 12, the vertical distance is 10, and we could look at the distance and say, okay, what's half of 10? Well, half of 10 is 5, and then what's half of 12? Half of 12 is 6, so if we go up 5 and over 6, do we still end up at -2, -2? And the answer is yes. So that would also be our midpoint. Just another way to look at it. So this is when we were given two endpoints. Okay, and then on the left side of your foldable, we're going to be looking at what happens if they give us an endpoint and they already give us the midpoint. So when we look here, we are looking for an endpoint given a midpoint. So one of our endpoints, we always name x1, y1. So we're going to go ahead and name this one x1, y1. And you'll remember from that previous spot that we named the midpoint xm, ym. And then we want to find the other endpoint. Okay, so the other endpoint is that x2, y2 that we are currently missing. So we're just taking that last step when we have two endpoints one step further. So our equation that we're using is still x1 plus x2 divided by 2. We're just adding that equal sign to be xm equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So same thing's happening with y. Okay, we've got ym equals the midpoint of y equals y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we need to insert in our numbers to our equation. Okay, xm is our -9, so we're going to say -9 equals, we know x1 is -1, plus we're trying to find x2, and we're dividing by 2. Now, the parentheses are just to help us keep everything together. Okay, so -1 plus x2, that can't be simplified, we can't do anything with it. So we need to get rid of that denominator by doing the opposite function, which means we're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. These 2's cancel, so we're left with -18 equals -1 plus x2. Then, to get x2 by itself, we need to add 1. So then -18 plus 1 is -17 equals our x2. That's our first one done. Then we are going to look at our y's, and the same thing. So we've got the midpoint of ym, which is -10, equals y1, which we know is 9, plus we don't know y2, divided by 2. So again, our first step is to multiply by 2 on both sides. These cancel out, so we are left with -20 equals 9 plus y2. Then we need to move away from y2, so we're going to subtract 9 on both sides. So we get -29 equals y2. So when it wants us to write this as a coordinate point, we would just write our point is -17, -29, and that would be your coordinates. Okay, so those are really the only three examples, types of problems that we have. I do want to look at one more thing with you, which is on a number line. Okay, we are going to get fractions a little bit more often on midpoint here. So it says, use the number line to find the coordinate of the midpoint of each segment. So if we were looking at number 1, okay, and we're looking at CE, we want to find the midpoint. Then we know our formula is point plus point. Okay, 0.1 plus 0.2 divided by 2. So C is -4 plus E is 2, and then we divide by 2. So -4 plus 2 is -2, divide by 2, and you end up with -1. Same thing with from A to F. With A to F, we would have -9, because we have to watch right here that it's in between 8 and 10. So -9 plus F is at 3 divided by 2. So here's where you have to be a little careful. -9 plus 3 is -6, and -6 divided by 2 would be -3. Okay, so this same idea would continue. Okay, AB is a little bit different. I'm going to change colors for us. If you look at AB, you can kind of look at the picture here, right? We have -9, and we have -7, and the only point that's directly in between that would be -8. Now, if we do the math, you would still get -8 because it's -16 divided by 2. But if you can look at the picture and get something like that, then I say go for it. Okay, so number 7 is a little bit of the weird one. Okay, this is maybe one of the most important. So point B is -7 plus D is 0 divided by 2. Now if we add -7 plus 0, then we get -7 divided by 2. Okay, now you cannot divide -7 by 2 and get an integer. Okay, if you divide -7 by 2, you end up with -3.5, or you could write it as a mixed fraction, -3.5. Okay, so I will take any one of these 3 answers. Any of those would work. Okay, the other one that you get a fraction on is number 6, so I want to do that one real quick. So number 6b, we would have -7 plus g, where we have 8 divided by 2. So -7 plus 8 is 1 divided by 2, and 1/2 is as simple as we get. So it's 1/2, or you could write it as 0.5. Either one would work there. Okay, if you need any extra help, make sure that you come and see me at lunch, and I would be more than happy to help you. Yeah, that's all there is to midpoints. Signing off.